Good afternoon. Welcome on behalf of Humanities Tennessee to this Southern Festival of Books session with Paula McLain. I'm Barbie Chadwick and will be your host this afternoon. Before we get into the heart of the session, I wanted to thank our sponsors of the book festival. We couldn't present these great authors without the help of Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Ingram Content Group, Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt University, and Parnassus Books. The festival is free thanks to these supporters and to individuals like you. If you've been enjoying the festival and enjoyed this session with Paula, go to Humanities Tennessee's website at www.humtn.org and make a donation. After you hear Paula talk about her fabulous new novel, When the Stars Go Dark, go to Parnassus Books, the official festival bookseller, and buy it. All purchases help support the festival. If you're watching on Facebook Live or YouTube, you can put your questions in the chat and we'll leave time for them at the end of the session. Paula is best known for her New York Times and internationally best-selling novel, The Paris Wife, which has been published in 34 languages. She was born in Fresno, California. After being abandoned by both their parents, she and her two sisters became wards of the California court system, moving in and out of various foster homes for the next 14 years. When she aged out of the system, she supported herself by working as a nurse's aide in a convalescent hospital, a pizza delivery girl, an auto plant worker, and a cocktail waitress before discovering she could and very much wanted to write. She is author of the best-selling titles Circling the Sun and Love and Ruin, as well as two collections of poetry and a memoir of her experiences in foster care, like family, growing up in other people's houses. Her latest title is When the Stars Go Dark, which was an instant New York Times bestseller, a Good Morning America pick, and an Amazon Editor's Choice. Her essays have appeared in many magazines. She currently lives in Cleveland with her family. And now, without further ado, here's Paula McLain. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you, Barbie. Thanks so much for hosting me today, and to the event sponsors, and particularly to Parnassus, which is one of the all-time best indie bookstores ever. And the last time I was in Nashville, I was able to, physically be in Nashville. And, on the way out of town, I remember having my driver stop at Biscuit Love or something and getting fried chicken on a biscuit. So we're not doing that today, but
unfortunately, no.
I know, unfortunately, we're not having any biscuit love, but we'll have some book love instead. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And,
so let's jump right into
let's do it. Oh, and yes, Barbie asked me to show a picture of the beautiful cover, since she doesn't have a physical book on hand, which is lovely. So
it was a wonderful book, and I know our viewers and attendees are going to really enjoy listening to you talk about it.
Thank you.
It's kind of called a complex mystery that will keep you glued to the page, and it certainly did that for me. So, and the other thing I loved about the way it's been talked about is that if you're a fan of Criminal Minds, you would love this book. And I will say I am a fan of Criminal Minds, and maybe that's why I love this book. So without giving too much away, set the stage for us and tell us a little bit about the book.
Absolutely. So I guess just the Reader's Digest condensed version is the central character is a missing persons expert in San Francisco in the 1990s who, after a terrible loss in her personal life, kind of quits everything, runs away from everything, and goes home. Now, like me, she grew up in foster care, but the place that feels most like home in the world to her is Mendocino, California. And so she goes there to heal. And instead, the first thing that happens almost from the moment she arrives is that she learns that a local teenage girl has vanished in midair, and she becomes helplessly drawn into the case against her own best interest. And it's really about how her story gels and mirrors the victim's story. And there are real events, real missing persons events from the 1990s that are worked into the storyline. And so I continue to surf this line between fact and fiction like I've been doing for many years now, writing historical novels. So,
well, you've written about some really badass women, and
I thank you. That gives me a little bit of a thrill having that acknowledged. Yeah, badass women, and sometimes
real
the men
women
are badass. What's that?
in your historical books. And this is really the first time you've done a fictional character. Uh, how was that making the switch? And how did you feel being plunged into something so new from what you've done before?
Yeah. It was all of the feels. It was like thrilling and terrifying and this risk that felt deeply irrational. And uh, yet, when an idea comes, a big idea comes that changes your course, I think you have one of two options, right? And ideas are mysterious. We don't know the workings of the subconscious. I'm in the middle of writing a historical novel and I have idea for a thriller when I don't even read thrillers. We have to honor these things sometimes. And so that's what happened. I was in the middle of Love and Ruin, and this idea came out of nowhere. And I decided to honor it and plunge into this story. And so the learning curve was super steep. So there was a heavy dose of humility that came along with it. I had to learn a new set of rules. It's almost like learning a new language, like entirely different conventions in this genre, just when I had kind of gotten the hang of the other one. And as you said, it was my first opportunity in almost a dozen years to write a purely fictional heroine. And lo and behold, as I got deeper and deeper into the story, she kind of took over and became almost an avatar, really. And I realized that I could give her all of my own obsessions and a lot of my own story. In fact, although that was not my intention from the beginning, honestly, I had no intention from the beginning except to write a book. It's always, I have a friend once who said writing a novel is like being a blind, naked mole rat, right? And every single novel, you're exactly in that same place. Like you're kind of just digging around in the dark and seeing what happens. And the trick is to learn to love over time, being that blind, naked mole rat.
So, was it more from your imagination than writing a historical novel where you had to research the character?
Absolutely. So if you think about it, there's always a marriage between my imagination and the historical facts on record. So the history provides a scaffolding. I have these moments. For instance, I know that on December 8th, Hadley and Ernest board a boat called the Leopoldina and sail for Paris, right? But I don't know about the fight they might have had in their cabin, right? Or what they say to each other in the dark. And nobody knows those things, right? So that's the moment that I'm then invited to plunge in. And the character's mind and heart is always this dark forest. But in terms of the storyline, that scaffolding, for the last 3 books, I've had that in place. I don't make up the action. I make up the scenes that reveal character and right. So in this story, yeah, I had, anything can happen in a novel, right? Anything can happen and it can happen at any time to anyone. And for the first 4 drafts, I think, Barbie, I set the action in the present. It was like 2016 or something. And what I ran up against as I was drafting was an irritation. Like you say, you like Criminal Minds, right? I like all that stuff too. And yet, when you watch these shows, like these CSI shows, they just know everything. They're all smarty pants and they have all this technology and they just kind of open their laptops and they solve it. And they always know exactly what's about to happen. And, somebody will spout some whatever about a blood spatter pattern. It's like, well, on this such and such a night, so-and-so was here. And then this is the answer, which isn't a very interesting way to explore character. I wanted my detective to be at sea a lot of the time, and maybe to get in her own way, and maybe to not have all of the answers because that's more interesting. And I also, I don't know, I wanted it to be more atmospheric. I wanted to have more conversations. I love depth psychology. So I wanted a bunch of people feeling their way toward answers and using their own life experiences to get there. And so I made a radical decision one day to set it in the 1990s instead of. So I wanted to be pre DNA, pre internet, pre cell phones. And then the moment that happened, and I just love all the surprises that come when you're writing a novel and just in the creative process in general. When that happened, I made a discovery one day. I was just doing some research, watching or rather listening to a podcast interview between two FBI detectives. And it just so happened that one of the detectives was a guy named Eddie Fryer, who was the lead detective on the Polly Klaas investigation. Now, I grew up in California, and so I was very familiar with Polly Klaas, one of the best sort of high-profile child abduction cases of the century, but also the largest manhunt in California history. And kind of all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when Eddie was talking through the timeline of the case, and he reminded me that it was the fall of 1993, October 1st, 1993, in Petaluma, California, which is 60 geographical miles and 10 days after my imaginary character disappeared.
Wow.
Right? And all that frisson then between the imaginary and the factual. And it just occurred to me that these two young women are contemporaries, even though one is fictional and one's not. It was just like being thrown against a kind of a barrier, right? That could become an opportunity if I chose to. What your mission, if you choose to accept it, right, is to do this super tricky thing of writing about fact and fiction.
I thought you planned that and had done.
That'd be smart. That would have been so damn smart. But
Oh, that's amazing.
surprise is our best friend, I think, as creators, as makers. And I love really not knowing where I'm going, but trusting the way just the same.
Very interesting. So, do you write your books chronologically, or do you write scenes and put them together?
I
Or
always think I'm working chronologically. I'm trying to work chronologically, like working toward, and I don't outline things. I don't have note cards. I would love to write that way. I have friends who write that way, and it seems so beautiful. And I think it would save time. But instead, it's this, I have these two sides of my personality. One is I want to keep dreaming, right? I want to be the kind of writer, like the kind of reader I was as a kid, which is falling into the world of a story and letting all the walls dissolve and being sort of swept away on a current, right? Almost like dreaming. And my subconscious mind is far more interesting and is working all of these things out. And then there's this other part of me, which is super, super, super proletariat, right? Very blue collar, in the chair every day, doing my work, whether or not the muse shows up, whether or not the magic carpet is parked in front of my chair or not. I still do the work, and I still, I say to friends who are writers, it's good to touch it every day. Like the story, it's there, and it's this concrete thing. It's organic. It's got its own life.
So I've heard that from a lot of writers, particularly during the book festival, listening to them talk, that you sit down and write every day, even if you really aren't sure what you're going to write. And how does that work? I mean, do you find that the muse comes to you while you're sitting there, or do
If
you
you're
wait?
lucky. If you're lucky, it does. And sometimes you just, make toast and stare at the wall. But I think the act for me is devotional, right? If I show up every day, if I keep spilling words into this story, sometimes it feels like just throwing words into a ditch. But what I'm doing is I'm falling in love with it, and I'm showing this thing that I'm making that I do love it, and that I'm going to show up every day. And sometimes over time, then the story, this is going to sound kind of wacky, but it kind of starts to feel like the story starts to trust me, that I'm going to show up every day no matter what. And then it kind of starts to love me back. And it develops, I have to say, some of my most intimate relationships have been with my books. My
Well, I can
therapist would have a
understand
lot to say
that.
about that, but it does. It feels like a dance. It feels like an intimate relationship.
So when you were writing about 1993, did you find it hard to stay in that period and not bring in things that we
Anachronistic.
take for granted
Mm.
today?
No, I loved it. I loved it, sort of in the same way that I loved when I was a kid, Swiss Family Robinson and Laura Ingalls Wilder, all those stories that were simpler, that kind of pare away whatever is external, including technology, so that the elements of the world get sharper and stronger, like the weather, for instance, or people and what people say. And so the town to me just got clearer and sharper when you can't pick up the phone, right? When you can't send somebody a text or an email, you have to talk to them, you have to meet them in the world. And no, it was really fantastic. With one of my research trips to Mendocino, instead of staying at one of the bougie, although they're beautiful hotels in town, I rented with a friend a cabin out in the woods, and it was dark, 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 right? It was dark, dark, dark and quiet out there. And in the morning, because it's like the woods there are redwood forests, old growth redwood forests. And so the light comes through. Even in the morning, it's kind of green and strange and eerie. And whether or not I was working on the book, like I wasn't writing, but I was writing, I was breathing the air, I was soaking up that the atmosphere. And that, lo and behold, the cabin that I rented ended up being the concrete, the palpable world. When I wrote scenes with Anna in the cabin, it's literally the place where I stayed, and her hikes over, across the headlands, and, in the fern forest. Like, these are places that I've walked with my own feet. So it was very easy to place her there, to conjure that world, because I'd been there.
So did you grow up hiking in the woods and
Mm.
and experiencing nature in the way that Anna does in the book?
I one of the things that I gave Anna as a character is a deep sense of nature as medicine, like nature as a place to go when you need to be held, when you need to know the world is real, when you need to hit your knees and just breathe the air, and to reground and to center. I wish I had grown up in Mendocino, which I think is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Northern California is just stupid beautiful. But I grew up instead in the Central Valley, in the San Joaquin Valley of California, so a couple of hours north and inland, just hot, dry, hellacious desert of a place. And yet I did also do kind of what she does, where I would take myself for walks at night, or I would ride my bike as the sun was going down, and I did feel that I found a way to get what I needed. I know a woman who likes to talk about things that mother us, right, or parent us, that aren't necessarily our biological parents. Books might be one of those things, and the physical world, the moon might be one of those things, trees, water, right? So it's really interesting to me. It sort of adds this layer of texture, and it also adds a layer of the truth. right?
Well, sun is my thing, which is why you see
Ah,
things going in the background because I have a skylight and it's
mm.
not, I don't, so anyway, I apologize.
See, now that's something you know about yourself, that the sun is one of your mothers.
Sun is definitely one of my mothers. Um, so is this probably the most personal book that you've written, including the memoir that you wrote?
Yeah, definitely. Although that sounds counterintuitive. I grew up, I spent 14 years in the foster care system, and then I wrote a book about that, a memoir, sort of telling the literal stories of how I grew up. Um, and yet, and yet, I feel like one of the things that happened is I wrote that book not long after I graduated. I did an MFA in creative writing at the University of Michigan, also in the 90s. And what happened was I wrote that book in a very writerly way. I was focusing on the imagery. I was focusing on the sentences. I did my MFA in poetry, right? I love descriptions. I love words. And when I would get to a scene that was kind of too hot to handle emotionally, I would go back to my words, right? But what I didn't really do was interrogate those scenes from that older point of view that is more meditative, that is more reflective, that is more analytical, but also more soulful in the adult body, talking about what it feels like to have that reality. I showed it, but I didn't tell it. And what Anna does is she looks at, for instance, the victim's life. The victim in the story is a girl named Cameron Curtis, who is adopted. And Anna grew up in foster care. And so there's this connection that they have. Obviously, not every kid who's adopted or every kid who grows up in foster care has trauma, but Anna recognizes something in Cameron, right? And she sees herself. And there's this almost subterranean but super deep connection between them. Anna understands that Cameron has probably experienced a lot of dislocation, right? And chaos and profound loss. And that when you build a self around that, there are sometimes holes in the psyche. And so this is a connection that Anna makes to Cameron as a point of deep empathy, and it's my connection to both of these characters, right? It's a way that I weave myself into the story. But in Anna's voice, I was able to say things that I could never say when I was confronting my own experience, right? Anna is able to speak a truth that is my actual truth, but that I could never say when I was saying it about my own story. I mean, in the same way that Hemingway, right, through Nick Adams, could confront pieces of his life that he was never able to confront literally, right? That our characters sometimes get us closer to the heart, to the truth of something in our lives.
Well, you can tell in the novel that you're also a poet because the writing is very poetic and beautiful, along with this very intense story.
Well, thank you. I actually can't help myself. It would be really, sometimes the language gets in the way. Um, but I can't do anything else. I mean, that's who I am as a writer. Like we all have our ticks, right? And as a person, as a human, I just like them. I love words. I've always loved them. And just the idea, the act of describing a place. Once I did an event and for one of my historical novels, and a reader stood up in the Q&A and said, not what are you going to write about next, but where are you going to take us? And I thought, that makes sense to have someone
Mhm.
articulate it to me that way. So that's what I'm doing, right? I'm with words, creating a place that then I enter imaginatively. And if I do it right, if I do it well enough, then I'm inviting somebody else to be in that space too. And it is very much the kind of reader I was when I was a kid. It is that magic carpet, right? That comes and sort of sweeps you away into this other realm that is. It's the outer world that is the inner world simultaneously, deeper and deeper into both of those things simultaneously.
Was it hard for you to tell the story and your story through Anna?
Was it hard? It happened so gradually the way, you know, that's the thing about a novel is it's bigger than you are, right? You can't hold it all at once. You can't see the whole thing. When I was working in poetry, I usually, wrote these small enough poems to fit on one page. I could turn it over, I could shake it like a snow globe, right? The thing about a novel, it gets away from you. It's like juggling, chainsaws and ponies and dinner plates and, all of that and shoes, and you can't hold it all at once. And so things slip in, right?
Okay.
Things
Yeah.
slip in and surprise you, and moments come and you realize you're writing some other story. And what would happen is I would get to a moment that I would be working on Anna's backstory, and something would slip in. Her relationship with her half siblings, for instance, it's not exactly what happened in my own life, but it's close enough that if family members read it, they would go, "Oh," right?
Right.
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 But it was never intentional. And I, you know, to me, that lack of, that relationship with uncertainty, that relationship with mystery, is a part of, it's a part of how I do it, how I do my work, and I like it. I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable. I once did an event with Jennifer Egan, and she writes on yellow legal pads, and it's this very intricate, she says, kind of dance with her subconscious. And the whole time she's working on the first draft, she's working really, really, really hard not to know what she's doing, right? Not to read what she's doing, to not know what she's up to.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you're not that way.
I am that way. And, I don't write on yellow legal pads, but what I'm doing, yes, is sort of letting this act of storytelling to kind
Yeah.
of take
Yeah.
over and lead me to more interesting places than my rational mind might lead me if I plotted it all out from point A to point Z. And here's the midpoint climax,
Mhm.
and here are these elements of story. I believe that there is an intuitive storyteller in us, and sometimes that person is going to lead us to those moments anyway, and we have to get out of our own way.
Well, you did in this book for
Well,
sure.
thank you.
We have a question from an audience. Okay, this is kind of a takeoff on what we've been talking about. Do you lead your characters or do they lead you? And is it different at different points in writing the book?
Yep. So do I lead my characters or do they lead me? Yes, both. When things are
Okay.
yeah, no, when things are working really well, there's this fluidity where I'll be out walking the dog and suddenly I'll realize that I'm in a scene and I'm talking to characters, I'm talking both sides, um, and it does in those moments feel like dictation, right? That I just have to get back. But what it is, it's just that thing has happened. I've kind of knitted myself firmly into the world, and then it's kind of always running like a movie in the back of my head. And then there are the days when it might as well be, smacking your face against a brick wall. And on those days, I believe I have no idea what dialogue is. What is this? What is this? How do people talk? And what is a scene? And why does anybody do this anyway? It's just so weird that people do this as a living. So it's both of those things. And it does feel different at different moments. It feels different on different days. But generally speaking, the beginning is the hardest part.
Is it really?
Getting that, getting the voice right, getting the rhythm of the work, the rhythm of the sentences, and just that, kind of you're building it, and then there becomes I don't know, like a fluidity or a facility or a like the relationship deepens, and I start to trust the story, and I know more and more of where I'm going. Yeah.
Well, you did a great job starting the book. It catches you
Oh,
right off the bat.
oh, thank you.
It does. So I want everybody to read it if they haven't already. So let's talk about, can you talk about a little more about your research, how you researched the polycloths and some of the other California history and
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So it was super interesting to me, as I said, kind of this fluky encounter with the some of the actual crimes, real life victims in California in the 1990s. And it was just a very different sphere than it is now, right? And the crime was just more rampant. There was a lot more unsolved crimes because we didn't have these databases linking DNA between perpetrators and victims, right? And so the story also let me get to some interesting places. So what we understand as these milk carton kids, for instance, right? This idea, if Polly Klaas was one of the best known cases in, in in the media, and it was like almost overnight, she's America's child. But why do some people instantly get taken up as a kind of a mascot? Why were thousands of people almost overnight searching for her when other people go missing and they basically just disappear? Like, why does that happen? And I was able to kind of plunge into that world by tracing the history, the actual history of some of these cases, And the other thing that happened is I started working with an actual detective. um, I wanted her voice to have incredible authority and veracity. She's a missing persons expert, right? And so a friend connected me with a retired detective. And it was one of those fluky things where suddenly I realized she might as well be Anna. She came of age as a woman in sensitive crimes in the early 1990s. She was working with young women who were carrying these wounds, and just the psychology, the way that she was able to meet me both at the emotional level but also the practical level, letting me know how certain things are handled technically, right? For instance, what does it feel like, to open a trunk where a body has been decomposing, for instance, and to help me with some of that language, and to help me understand, for instance, I remember there being one scene where I had Anna have a super strong emotional reaction to a certain moment and to cry. And this detective, her name's Marianne Flinstats, and she's amazing. She's like, yeah, except we have compartments. And the part of her that is on the job in that moment is going to be detached enough from the encounter that she's not going to go there. And also, she said, as a woman in the field surrounded by men, I never felt that I had the freedom to be emotional. Meanwhile, the men around me were often falling apart, right? But I didn't have that freedom. Or even little things. She's like, she would never take off her shoes, or she wouldn't ask this question. She'd ask it later in the interview. Or it was just so, it was fascinating. And I'd never had that kind of rapport. And she got so, one of the biggest compliments I thought was that the detective I was working with as a reader started to feel like Anna was an actual character. Like
nice.
she would come back from a bike ride and she would say, okay, so I was thinking about Anna today, and here's the thing, I think she has more work to do. I think she has more work to do in the world.
So do I.
Oh, thank you.
So there's a psychic in the book. Are you connected with a psychic? And talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So there is a psychic in the book, character named Tally Hollander. And it is true. And even in the Polly Klaas case, there was a psychic, or at least one, that kind of turned up and said, I'm having visions. She wanted to see Mark Klaas's apartment to see if she could feel Polly's vibrations, right? There are crackpots, and then there are legitimately experienced, gifted psychics, mediums who work with police and the FBI all the time and provide useful information. So I wanted Anna to have a hefty dose of skepticism, but also her foster mother, Eden, was sensitive, in Anna's words. She's has a dream. She's a little bit witchy. And I'm more of that category. I'm a little sensitive, right? I have dreams that sometimes feel they're like premonitions. And I've always had a really rich, I don't know what it is. Do I believe it? Do I believe in psychics? In a way, it doesn't matter, because the psychic in the book for Anna becomes almost like a therapist, right? That what she does is not provide clues. She doesn't lead Anna, for instance, to help, find the victim. But what she does is she turns Anna back on herself and helps her understand that as difficult as her life path is, she has a purpose, right? And is there anything richer to know on the human journey, right? That the things that cause us pain are in fact what leads us to meaning.
Okay. So who's your favorite character in the book?
Cricket.
Okay, let me ask you about Cricket. Has a dog adopted you? Is that where that came from?
Yes.
Cricket is a dog.
So Cricket, for those of you who haven't read the book, Cricket is a dog that enters the action and becomes this partner for Anna when she thinks she doesn't need one. Anna is always sort of a little too independent and a little prickly, and she doesn't trust people and she doesn't need help. She's one of those people, right? And so Cricket comes along, yes, and adopts Anna and helps her see and softens her a little bit. And yes, my dog is not in the room currently, but yes, I have a dog that has a similar role in my life. But Cricket is a real dog. Like Cricket is a dog that I've met, is the dog of a sister of a dear friend of mine and when I met that dog and kind of had a moment, looked into its soul through its eyes and said, I think you need to be in this book. I'm going to put you in a book.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so Cricket is your favorite character.
It's Cricket and Hap.
Oh, talk about Hap a little bit.
Yeah, Cricket. So Hap is Anna's foster father, and he's also a forest ranger. And when Anna comes to Mendocino, she's 10 years old, and she has had a lot of, she's a survivor. She's had to be, right? She's had a lot, life has been really tough on her. A lot of moves, a lot of loss, and kind of like I was at that age. And so she's guarded. She's super defended. And she doesn't trust people, and she doesn't let people get close to her. And Hap, instead of trying to, batter his way in, simply accepts her and understands that, of course, she would be this guarded, armored soul. And instead, what he does is he gives her this competence in the physical world. He introduces her to the world that he knows really well, nature, another level of survivalist, right? How to build a fire, how to follow a trail, how to build shelter, how to find water, how to find your way home if you're lost, how to read the signs. And in doing so, he gives her a gift that she'll have for the rest of her life, and which come into play in the action of the story as well. But mostly what he gives her is he likes her, right? He just likes her. And it's okay for her to be exactly who she is. And I'm asked often, was there a character like that? Was there a foster parent like that in your own childhood? And is that why, did you have a foster father like Hap? And unfortunately, the answer is no. And I didn't have a Hap and I didn't have an Eden, but I kind of wish every kid does now. Mm-hmm.
So that's truly fiction.
That's truly fiction. Yeah. Yeah, he's one of my favorite characters I've ever written. I really enjoyed being in his head. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I really liked him as well.
Thank you.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So I want to encourage our audience to ask questions if they have any questions of Paula. I, of course, have more. I could ask lots of questions. We could go on for hours on this about this wonderful book. But I wonder, what's, you mentioned a historical novel. What's next for you?
I really don't know. I'm in blind naked mole rat mode at the
You're in
moment.
what kind of mode?
Blind naked mole rat mode, I said, that every novel is sort of digging your way through the dark. I do sometimes think that, I don't know, this world, I was so invested in it, right? These characters like Wanda, the bartender, or the homeless couple in the park, or they just seem so real to me. And I want to give them more time. I want to be with them a little bit more. The book has been optioned for TV as a limited series. So that's something, if that ever sort of came to place, that could be super interesting to me to extend the story. Yeah. And I have these questions, right? What happens when Anna goes home? What happens in her marriage? Or, for instance, wilder questions like, did Hap really die? Like,
Oh, that's a good one.
ooh, yeah, that is a good question.
So, who would you like to play Anna? Have you thought about that?
Oh my goodness. It would have to be somebody that has the tough part, but also a lot of vulnerability and emotional sensitivity. And I think of somebody who can play like that ragged edge a little bit, like an Amy Adams, for instance, or yeah, I don't know why she comes to mind so powerfully to me. Someone suggested someone more feminine like Natalie Portman, where a small physical stature, but then a level of strength and um, fierceness, intensity, determination under the surface. I think somebody like that could be
That's
really.
how I visualize Anna.
Ah.
Smaller but fierce
Mm-hmm.
physical presence.
Yeah. Right. And then with a level of just physical competence, right?
Mhm.
Physical competence in the world, and then this emotional perceptivity, and then the burden of her empathy, like the burden of her experience and her questions about whether or not she's capable of forgiving herself or if the world is capable of forgiving her. Like she carries these burdens, but also a lot of hope.
So we have 1 minute left. What would you like to say to your readers about this book?
Yeah, I guess I just want to thank readers, and I get beautiful letters, honestly, from readers saying, thanks for having the courage to write this story. Thanks for writing about such difficult subject matter. Thank you for taking me into a world I wasn't sure I wanted to go into, but then after I was there, I felt good about it.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we can be a little leery when we are faced with a choice of reading a dark book, for instance, or something lighter. But it's counterintuitive that sometimes reading a story that's mirrors some of our more difficult, the contours of human experience that are more difficult, can make us in the end feel lighter. Because it's cathartic and it takes us to a place emotionally. And I believe that's why we read stories and why we write them as well, because we want to have an emotional experience. And when we're taken through that, that cataract or that vortex, we're led to a place that feels, it feels human.
Well, this book definitely felt human. And I want to thank you for being here with us today and
Thank
talking to
you.
us about the When the Stars Go Dark.
Yes.
Book so everyone can see it. Go to Parnassus and buy it today. You
Thank
don't
you.
want to miss it. So thank you, Paula. It's been
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure as well. And I'm really just grateful for your time and your lovely questions. Thank you.
so much. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Bye.